Hello, and welcome to another episode of the Change Well podcast. Now, I hate to admit this, but I've been a curmudgeon most of my life. Fortunately, I've changed to a sunnier disposition in recent years, about 10 years. One critical component of that change was the development of the skill of active listening, the topic of today's podcast. In a prior version of myself, I may have not yelled and scowled like Clint Eastwood on Gran Torino and told someone, "Get off my lawn." But I was known as a crusty fellow. For instance, when I was introduced to one of my favorite colleagues for the first time in her role as special projects lead, I, unsatisfied with the project's progress up to the point, now understand, she wasn't even involved in the project yet, said, "Well, look at you. Your project is off the rails, so you can't be too special. So how can you call yourself special projects?" Now, I already had the quip in my mind. It was not even going to listen to what she had to say about the project. Going from crusty like this one was to collegial does not happen overnight. You have to work on it by becoming a better listener and being more empathetic. Developing the skill of active listening has helped me change from grumpy to gracious. And exactly what is active listening? Now, Charles Duhigg, people that have listened to this podcast know I love as a writer, explains how active listening is hard, but the key to honest communication in his latest book, Super Communicators, How to Unlock the Secret Language of Connection. This is what he says. So to become a super communicator, all we need to do is listen closely to what's said and unsaid, ask the right questions, recognize and match others' moods, and make our feelings easy for others to perceive. Simple, right? Well, of course not. Now, as I said, I highly recommend Duhigg's book, as I also recommend The Power of Habit, which is the book that changed my life. Although I am not yet a super communicator, I've become a better communicator, friend, and colleague through active listening. And here are 5 ways that I did it, and I think you can do too. First, listen to others, not yourself. You will not learn anything if you're listening to the voice in your head. You know, there's 3 conversations going on whenever one person is talking to the other person. The 2 internal discussions in each other's minds and actual dialogue going on between the 2 people. What you need to do is turn off the inner voice in your head to truly hear and see, more on that later in this podcast, what the other person is saying. If you focus on that pithy comeback that you're about to do, you will miss the point and the emotion the other person is trying to convey. Instead of trying to win that argument, turn off that voice in your head and focus on the person speaking to you. You will better understand their point of view and sentiment behind it. If you don't understand, ask for clarification to avoid escalation. The second secret way, listen with your eyes. 70% of or more of any conversation is nonverbal. You get a better feel for the person's emotion when talking to them face to face or screen to screen than through an email. And also, talking about screens, stop looking at your phone. The other thing is, when you're on a Zoom call, turn on your camera and have everybody else turn on the camera so you can actually see the 70% of the communication that's going on non-verbally. If you take the time, you can notice more about the person's emotional state and physical state. For instance, a frantic person who just dealt with Austin's morning traffic may say something that causes you offense because they're simply stressed out. You may take it wrong if you don't see that they're still recovering from the shock of a car that strayed too far in their lane. Now, I've had that happen on a few Mondays, so I can tell you it stresses you out. So don't talk to me on a Monday. I may be a little stressed out. The third thing, pause to understand the type of conversation. The verbal cues we just talked about also help you to understand the type of conversation that you're having. When someone is emotional, they don't want you to tell them, "Hey, here's your solution." Instead, they want you to provide some empathy and listen to them. Giving them a practical solution when a discussion is emotional does not do any good. Instead, it will just lead to miscommunication. Let me give you another great example from Charles Duhigg in Super Communicators. Miscommunication occurs when people are having different kinds of conversations. If you are speaking emotionally while I'm talking practically, we are in essence using two different cognitive languages. This explains why, when you complain about your boss, "Jim is driving me crazy," and your spouse responds with a practical suggestion, "Well, if you just invited him to lunch," it's more apt to create conflict than connection. I'm not asking you to solve this. I just want some empathy. So the best way to avoid miscommunication when you're having a different type of conversation than the person you are talking to is to pause and ask for clarification. In the above example, the spouse should have paused and said, "It sounds like Jim is getting on your nerves. I know how that feels. How can I help you?" In this way, you invite connection and show empathy. Fourth, mirror their conversation to show understanding. Mirroring is another effective way to demonstrate active listening and advance a relationship. I rarely practiced this skill in my prior life as curmudgeon. Let me show you what I did one time and what I should have done. Now, this occurred it's probably 15, 20 years ago now. One of our technical architects was concerned with an element of a framework we were using. This framework was used in over 1,000 projects in our firm, so I was not too concerned about it. But the technical architect, who was a key indirect leader in our group, was. Here's the technical architect. "I'm concerned about this framework we are using. It has a flaw, I think." The prior Don: "Don't worry about it. We have used it in over 1,000 projects, so it should not be a problem." What was the result of this conversation? Well, you can guess. The technical architect left near the end of the project, which lowered the team's morale. In addition, the concern was valid, even though it didn't cause a significant problem. Here's what I should have said using the mirroring technique. "I hear you think the framework has a flaw. What is the flaw and how might we address it?" And then the technical architect would have said, "We should show the framework team the flaw. I'm not sure that it will impact us, but it could under certain circumstances, and it's better to tell them to be sorry." In this way, I could have probably kept the person on the project and kept the morale in check. The second conversation demonstrates mirroring. The new Don echoes back what the technical architect said to show that he's listening. Now I'm going to give you another book. Chris Voss, in his great book on negotiation, Never Split the Difference, explains mirroring. Mirrors work magic. Repeat the last 3 words or the critical 1 to 3 words of what someone has just said. We fear what's different and are drawn to what's similar. Mirroring is the art of insinuating similarity, which facilitates bonding. Use mirrors to encourage the other side to empathize and bond with you. Keep people talking, by your side, time to regroup, and encourage your counterparts to reveal their strategy. Now, every conversation is a negotiation, so use mirroring judiciously. What that means is don't go and sound like some psychologist and mirror everything, but mirror the critical things to show that you're listening. The last thing, find commonalities for deeper connection. The best conversations form an authentic connection through commonalities. Even with people who have differing views, you can find something in common. The best way to find these commonalities is through the techniques above. Once you find a commonality, however, you must be careful about how you use it. You should not use it as a way to one-up the person. If someone tells you they're having a hard time because their kid is in the hospital, don't go on and on about the time your kid was in the hospital and now it stressed you out and what you did. That would make the conversation about you instead of what they feel at that moment. Instead, it would be best to say something like this. I went through something similar. Then ask them, how do you feel about it? And hear them out and then just say, yeah, I felt a little bit like that. And that builds a connection. You see the difference? You're not trying to one-up them. You're trying to build a connection. Now, these are just 5 ways that I have become a more active listener and less of a curmudgeon. If you are struggling with a similar problem, I recommend both books mentioned in this podcast, The Super Communicators by Charles Duhigg and Never Split the Difference by Chris Voss. They will help you be less grumpy and more gracious and to change well. And until next time, change well.